Have you ever worn a name that wasn't yours? A life handed to you like a costume? This is the story of a woman who walked away from the version of herself others chose, and found freedom in a place no one was looking. The train rolled into Stillwater just after noon. No crowds. No waving hands. Just wind sweeping dust across an empty platform, a place people leave behind, not one they run to. But that day, something broke the silence. A girl, young, lost, dressed in white that looked more like surrender than celebration. Her wedding dress was torn, her boots covered in mud. She had no bag, no escort. Just a crumpled piece of paper in one hand and the kind of panic in her eyes that speaks louder than any scream. She stepped off the train like she didn't mean to, like the world had nudged her forward before she was ready, and then, as if the last bit of strength had left her, she collapsed. That's when Elijah moved. He wasn't anyone special, just a quiet rancher checking on a delayed saddle shipment. But in that moment, without words, he crossed the platform in 3 strides and caught her like a fallen branch. Pale lips, bruised wrists, a body too light for someone still alive. When he touched her shoulder, her eyes opened just long enough to whisper, "Don't let them find me. Please." That was enough. He didn't ask her name. Didn't ask why she was dressed for a wedding but looked like she'd come from a war. He just picked her up and carried her out of that place away from whatever storm had dropped her at his feet. And later that night, as she slept beneath a wool blanket in the spare room of his father's old ranch, he stared at the paper she'd dropped. A train ticket. One way. Paid in full. But the name printed on it wasn't hers. And on the back, scribbled in a rush, 4 words, "He's not who you think." You ever get a feeling, deep in your gut, that someone isn't running from something ... They're running to the last chance they've got left? That was her. A woman torn out of one story, dropped into another still breathing, but barely. Believing she deserved to. And Elijah. He didn't save her the way stories like this usually go. He just stood there steady, and gave her the one thing no one else had. A place to fall without questions. Sometimes that's all it takes. Not a hero, not a rescue. Just someone who doesn't look away. She woke up in a bed that wasn't hers, beneath a quilt that smelled faintly of cedar and ash. The kind of smell that says someone still believes in warmth, even after years of being alone. Her throat was dry. Her wrists were bruised. Her dress still. A wedding dress, though it felt like a costume now clung heavy with regret. And for a long moment, she didn't move. Because when you've been running long enough, stillness can feel like danger. Outside, boots creaked on wood. A kettle rattled. The scent of fresh bread floated down the hallway, and something in her loosened just enough to let her stand. In the kitchen, the man who carried her from the train, Elijah, was kneading dough like it was the most natural thing in the world. He didn't flinch when she appeared. Just glanced over and said, "You should have slept more." She stared back, not knowing whether to thank him or run. "You didn't ask my name," she said. "Didn't seem like you wanted to share it," he replied. "I don't," she whispered. "Because it's not mine, not anymore." He didn't push. He poured her tea instead. That moment, quiet, unforced, meant more than 1,000 questions ever could. Most people, when they find someone broken, want answers. They want a fix, to define, to own. But Elijah didn't ask for her past. He gave her space to decide her future. And in that silence, something sacred happened. Choice was returned to her. "I need to leave by morning," she said, eyes still guarded. "They'll come looking. You have tonight," he answered calm. "To rest, or to decide what kind of woman you'll be when they do. Think about that. How often are we given space not just to survive, but to choose who we'll become?" Next, not many of us wake up in strange places wearing someone else's name. But we've all felt that ache, the need to shed what no longer fits. A job, a relationship, A version of ourselves we no longer recognize. Sometimes, the kindest thing someone can do is nothing at all, just be there, without expectation. Elijah didn't save her, but he gave her room to save herself. And in a world that too often defines women by what they've survived, he reminded her, you are more than your escape. You are who you decide to be, starting now. Not long after she arrived, the quiet of the ranch was broken. Just 3 slow knocks on the wooden gate, the kind that don't rush, but don't ask permission either. Elijah was out back, splitting wood, when he heard them. He paused mid-swing. Nobody came out that early without a reason. And reasons, in his experience, usually meant trouble. A man on horseback waited beyond the gate. Tall, still, dressed in black wool that hadn't caught a speck of dust, despite the long road. That told Elijah everything. This man hadn't traveled far. Just carefully. I'm looking for a girl, the rider said flatly. Came in on the Stillwater train, wearing white. Elijah leaned against a post, slow and steady. Train didn't stop here. You're 3 ridges too far west for the main road. The man didn't blink. You sure? Plenty of girls out there, Elijah said. But the ones in white don't usually run toward nowhere. The rider's smile didn't touch his eyes. She's fragile. Confused, family's worried. Sick, you'd be doing her a kindness, pointing me the right way. Elijah asked, she got a name? Many, the man replied, but only one she's supposed to answer to. That was it, the giveaway. No brother, no uncle, no friend talks like that. Elijah knew this wasn't family. This was ownership disguised as concern, maybe a buyer, maybe a groom. Either way, someone who believed a woman in a dress could be claimed like land or cattle. Elijah's voice didn't rise, but his jaw set like stone. Well then, he said, you'd better figure out which one before you ask strangers to help you drag her back. There was a pause, just long enough to register the truth between them. Then the rider turned, tugging his reins. If you see her, he called over his shoulder, tell her she has one more chance. After that, we stop being polite. He disappeared down the trail, but the air didn't clear with him. It thickened. Because sometimes danger doesn't come with shouting. It comes with practiced calm and 2 clean boots. Elijah returned to the house. She was already in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, hands in flour like she'd always belonged. He came, didn't he? She asked. He did, Elijah replied. He's not done looking. Neither am I, she said. And right there, between dough and dust and 2 quiet hearts, the fight shifted. This wasn't about hiding anymore. It was about choosing to be seen on her terms. Her name wasn't Clara Belle Morton. Not really. It was borrowed, taken in desperation, stitched into a dress that didn't belong to her, and pinned to a story she was never meant to live. The real Clara had backed out the night before the train. Got scared, got smart. But someone still had to show up at the station in Denton Valley, where a man waited with land, promises, and a wedding contract signed in ink and silence. So this girl, the one with bruises on her wrists and panic, behind her eyes took Clara's name, her dress, and her one-way ticket to a life she didn't choose. She thought maybe, just maybe, it was safer than the one she was leaving behind. But safety, it turns out, is not something men like Henry Lane offer. It's something they sell. Something they control. When he met her, he didn't smile. He gripped her wrist too tight, called her Clara like he owned the name. And when she finally told him quietly, in the back of his wagon, that she wasn't who he thought she was, he just laughed. You are now, he said. That night, under a ceiling that didn't feel like shelter, she climbed out the window barefoot. Still wearing the veil, still shaking. She walked 4 miles through snow, her feet freezing, her breath barely holding. She didn't know where the train was going when she boarded it. She only knew it was going away. And somehow, by accident, or fate, It dropped her in still water, mud-stained, worn thin, and alive. Think about that for a second. How many people do you know who live inside a name that doesn't fit? A role they didn't choose? How many wear the smile expected of them, sign the papers, sit quietly at dinner, and convince themselves that survival is the same as freedom? She almost believed it, too. Until it hurt, until it bruised, until silence became a prison and a stranger's. Last name a chain. Running away didn't make her weak. It made her awake. And maybe she didn't know who she was yet. But she knew who she wasn't. And sometimes, that's the first real step toward becoming. Days passed. The snow began to melt in patches, but the question still lingered, unspoken, waiting. Then, one morning, a stranger arrived, on foot. No horse, no weapons, just a long coat, dust on his boots, and a tiredness in his step that only comes from walking miles with something too heavy to say out loud. He wasn't like the others. Not a threat, not a buyer. Just a man with a message. "I'm looking for someone," he said. Train manifest listed her as Clara Belle Morton. She stepped forward, something in her chest tightening. "What was his name?" she asked. "Henry Lane," he replied. Said he had a government match license. Said he was a veteran. Said a lot of things. I believed him until my real sister came back. Clara, the real Clara, alive, safe, and still thinking about the girl who'd taken her place. The man reached into his coat and pulled out a folded note. "She asked me to give you this. 5 words. Scrawled in a new, careful script. You gave me my life." She didn't cry. Not right away. But something inside her cracked open, like a door that had been locked for too long. Because for the first time, what she'd done wasn't just about survival. It had meant something. It had saved someone else. Let's pause here. Let's talk about what that actually means. In a world where women are told to stay quiet, stay small, stay still, she stepped into danger to protect someone she'd never even met. She wore a stranger's name like armor. She stood in front of the wrong man so the right one wouldn't find Clara, and even though it nearly broke her, it worked. How often do we carry someone else's burden without knowing if it'll make a difference? That letter said it did. You gave me my life. She didn't run blindly. She ran bravely. And the woman who'd once collapsed on a train platform in a torn wedding dress was now something else entirely. Not lost. Not broken, just beginning. And sometimes that's the only thanks we need. Not applause. Not recognition. Just proof that what we risked gave someone else the chance to live. She didn't say a word when she stepped outside. No speech. No ceremony. Just a bundle clutched tight in both hands, fabric, paper, memories folded between them. The sky was turning, that strange hour between gold and gray, when the world seems unsure if it's ending or beginning again. She crouched beside a fire pit Elijah's father had once used to burn brush and bad harvests. But what she was about to burn wasn't dead wood. It was weight. Inside the bundle, a torn wedding dress, still stained with mud and sweat and fear. A train ticket, crumpled but legible, printed with a name that never truly belonged to her. And a letter rushed, messy, scrawled with a warning. "He's not who you think." She placed them gently in the center like kindling, then struck the chuma. Flint, once, twice. The third time it caught small, uncertain, but alive. Elijah watched from the porch, arms crossed, saying nothing. That silence, that space was the most generous thing he could give her. He finally asked, quiet, "What? Are you burning?" She didn't look away from the flames. "Everything that made me believe I was someone else." And isn't that what so many of us carry? Things that were handed to us without asking, titles, roles, versions of ourselves that never fit, but somehow stuck. Maybe it's a job you hate but were told was secure, a marriage that turned into a mask, a name that always felt like it belonged to someone braver, someone quieter, someone else. We wear these things like armor until they become cages. But this was her way out. The fire grew, slow but sure. Lace curled into ash. Ink ran into nothing. Silk hissed as it gave up the ghost of who she used to be. And still, she didn't flinch. She just watched Dot when Elijah asked, "Do you feel free?" She paused. "No," she said. "But I feel like there's finally room for something else." That's the truth no one tells you about freedom. It's not a moment of triumph. It's not some bright, cinematic victory. It's quieter than that, heavier. It's the slow, steady clearing of space in your soul, clearing enough wreckage so something honest can finally take root. And sometimes, all it takes to begin again is letting the old story burn. The next morning, the sun cut through the window like a quiet invitation. No footsteps chased her, no voices called her back. Just light, soft, steady. And on the kitchen table sat an old ledger Elijah's, the one he used for cattle, for records, for things that mattered. He placed it in front of her without a word, just flipped to a fresh page and wrote one line at the top. Name. Then he handed her the pencil. She stared at that blank space like it was a mirror. For the first time, no one was telling her who to be. No one had filled it in for her. No birth certificate, no forged train ticket, no groom's last name stamped in legal ink. It was hers now to define, to reclaim. Her fingers didn't shake this time. She wrote, Lena Ray Whitlow. 3 names, each carrying something she chose to keep. Lena, her grandmother's first name, the one who taught her how to plant things and let them grow. Ray, because light had always felt like a language she wanted to learn. And Whitlow, her mother's middle name, soft but solid, like the ground she now stood on. She didn't ask Elijah if it was okay. And he didn't ask why those names. He just smiled, nodded once, and said, Lena Ray it is. There's something powerful about choosing your own name. Not as a performance, not as a rejection, but as a return to the person you were before the world told you what you had to be. It's not about escaping your past. It's about rewriting the narrative from the inside out, because names carry weight. Sometimes they're heavy with history, with expectation. Sometimes they feel like walls, but the right name, one you claim with full breath and clear hands, that name can be a key. Lena didn't become someone new that day. She just finally stepped fully into the person she'd been becoming all along, quietly, fiercely, on her own terms. And that might be the most radical kind of freedom there is. It didn't come with a warning, no smoke on the horizon, no sound of hooves from miles off. Just a man, one she knew too well, riding up the trail like he still had a claim on her life. Henry Lane, taller than she remembered. Broader maybe. Or maybe it was just the way anger sits on a man when he believes something once has dared to walk away. She stepped onto the porch before Elijah could say a word. She could smell Henry before she even saw his face leather, sweat, whiskey. And that cold entitlement too many women recognize before they're even old enough to name it. He didn't greet her. Just sneered and said, "Ain't you hard to find?" She didn't flinch. "You wore the dress, ate my food, slept under my roof. You think you can run from that?" She looked him in the eye. "I never was Clara. And you knew that. Don't matter," he snapped. "You came. You signed. That makes you mine." That's when Elijah appeared. Quiet but solid, standing near the gate, hand resting by his belt, not on his gun, but close enough to remind Henry that Stillwater wasn't Denton. "If you finish that sentence," Elijah said, "you won't make it back on that horse." Henry turned to him, laughed bitterly. "This your new man? Looks soft." "Looks deceive," Elijah answered, stepping forward, but Lena, she didn't. Let them finish. She stepped between them. Not out of fear, but something fiercer. "If you're here to drag me back," she said, "you'll do it in front of a witness. And I swear, Henry, you'll never forget the shame." For a second, He wavered, not with fear, with calculation. The kind of hesitation a man makes when he realizes he's no longer in control. And then, without another word, he turned his horse and disappeared down the trail. And just like that, the woman he once thought he owned became something he couldn't touch. Lena didn't win that moment because she shouted louder. She won it because she didn't run. Because for the first time, she stood on her own name, her own story, her own damn porch and said, "Enough." And in that silence, something sacred was restored. Her voice, her power, her place, not a victim, not a runaway. Just a woman who finally knew she didn't owe anyone her obedience, only her truth. She didn't wait for him to ask. Didn't need a proposal or a promise sealed with fanfare. That morning, Lena reached for the ring Elijah once offered, silver, simple, not meant to claim but to remind her of choice. She slipped it onto her own finger. No one handed it to her. No one told her when or how. And that made all the difference. "It doesn't mean we're married," she said, smiling. Elijah looked at her, steady as ever. "Doesn't mean we aren't," he answered. "We'll let the land decide. Because sometimes freedom isn't loud. It's not a door kicked open or a headline made. Sometimes it's a woman standing barefoot in a quiet house, putting on a ring not as a symbol of being chosen, but because she chose. Not just the man, not just the place, but herself." Lena stayed. Not because she had to, or because there was nowhere else to go, but because the silence of the land no longer felt like exile. It felt like space to plant something, to rebuild, to begin again. She cleared the barn, tilled the earth, raised chickens that refused to be tamed, and a mule that answered to no one. She taught herself to mend fences, to read weather, and to knead dough without second-guessing the rhythm of her own hands. And when children wandered too far from town and showed up at her gate, she didn't send them away. She fed them biscuits, told them stories, and taught them how to tie a proper knot, because knowing how to hold something or let it go matters more than people think. And maybe that's what real freedom looks like. Not erasing the past, but building something that can hold it without being defined by it. Not waiting for someone else to name you, but carving your name into the rhythm of every day you wake up and stay. Lena didn't become someone else. She became more of herself. And the ring? It was never about belonging to someone. It was about coming home to who she had always been, unclaimed, unafraid, and finally unbound. Years passed. The house didn't change much. Its porch still leaned with time, and the wind still spoke through the cracks like it had something to say. But inside, something had rooted. Not just comfort, not just peace, but presence. A quiet. Knowing that the life being lived here wasn't borrowed, wasn't forced, wasn't running anymore. Lena never told the whole story to everyone. She didn't have to. But when a curious child once asked her, "Were you really the bride who ran away?" she smiled and said, "I didn't run. I arrived. Because there's a difference, isn't there? Between escaping and choosing. Between being lost and deciding, finally, where you belong." Lena's journey wasn't about fleeing, it was about finding. A place, yes, but more importantly, a version of herself that didn't shrink under someone else's expectations. Clara Morton, the real one, was safe. Henry Lane was never seen again. Some said he vanished into the desert. Others whispered he'd been arrested somewhere near Dodge. But Lena didn't chase the rumors. She didn't need to. The story that mattered was the one she was still writing. And then came a new chapter. Lena gave birth to a daughter. She named her Hope Ray Whitlow, not because it was pretty, but because it was earned. Because it carried the weight of everything Lena had once been denied: choice, light, safety, the ability to breathe without fear of being erased. Hope, not as a dream, but as a legacy. Ray, like her own middle name, a beam breaking through. And Whitlow, a name carved into the dirt of the land she stayed to rebuild. She held her daughter close in the same room where she'd once burned her past, same firelight, same walls. Different woman. And on the last page of Elijah's ledger, the one where her own name had been written with trembling hands, she added one more line, clear and certain. Hope Ray Whitlow, born of ash, raised in light. Sometimes the most powerful stories don't end in victory. They end in continuance, in something that survives you, grows beyond you. Lena didn't just save herself, she built something worth passing on. At the bottom of the old ledger, in handwriting steadier than it had ever been, Lena wrote one final line. Just one, but it held everything. She was found on the platform in white, but she left her mark in ink. That was how she chose to close her story, not with noise, not with a grand farewell, but with the quiet permanence of her own words. Ink doesn't beg to be believed. It just stays. It's not loud, but it lasts. And that's all Lena ever wanted. Not to be remembered for how she fled, or for the dress she burned, or even the man she faced down, but for the choice she made to write her own name, to stay, to live. Years later, neighbors would still talk about her, usually in whispers that carried more reverence than curiosity. And when they did, they didn't call her a runaway. They didn't ask where she came from or what she'd been through. Instead, they said, she was never lost. She was just looking for a place where no one asked who she had been, only who she chose to be. That's the kind of freedom no map can give you. The kind you don't arrive at by chance or by train. You build it, slowly, painfully, with fire and silence and one true word at a time. We spend so much of life trying to be understood, to prove where we've been, what we've survived, why we matter. But maybe the most powerful kind of arrival is the one that doesn't need explaining. The one where you're finally seen for what you decided, not what you escaped. Lena didn't rewrite history. She just refused to let it be the only thing written about her. And in the end, the girl in the white dress wasn't just a chapter. She became the author, because the stories we leave behind aren't made from the names others give us. They're made from what we dare to write down when no one else is holding the pen.